Yo, Ben here. Today, we're going to talk about making Home Assistant pretty. Let's get to it. So if you've played with Home Assistant before, then you might know that sometimes the user interface can get a little crazy. If you're like me, you add a ton of components and switches, and then you open the user interface and it's like, blah! Yeah, it gets a little ridiculous. So in this video, I want to talk about some strategies. Got a frog in my throat. So in this video, I want to talk about some strategies for managing the Home Assistant user interface, primarily by using views, groups, icons, friendly names, and changing the default view. Let's get to it. Again.
So, rather than trying to start with my main Home Assistant instance, I want to show you guys how to get started with something a little easier. By the way, if you're curious about how I use views and groups with my main Home Assistant instance, you can check my GitHub page that's linked in the video description. So, my dev instance of Home Assistant is pretty boring. Let me add some components to it so we have something to play with. Because I'm lazy, I'll connect to my Pi using WinSCP. But if you have the time, you should set up file sharing through Samba. It makes accessing your Home Assistant configuration files way easier. Now that I'm connected, I'll access my Home Assistant configuration file in /home/has/.homeassistant. This should be the same address for anybody that's installed Home Assistant using the all-in-one script. As you can see, my current Home Assistant configuration file is pretty boring. But with a click of a button, it's now much more exciting. I added some components here, which really doesn't matter, but it'll give us something to play with. I'll go ahead and save this, and then restart the Home Assistant instance by going back to the Home Assistant front end, and then going to the Services Developer tool, and then going to Home Assistant /restart, and then clicking Call Service. You can tell Home Assistant is restarting when you see the little warning triangle pop up next to streaming updates. Alright, looks like we're back up and ready to get going. The first thing I want to show you is the Customize options inside of Home Assistant. If you go to the Home Assistant website and then click Getting Started and then scroll down to Configuration and then Customizing Devices and Services, there's some code here that shows you how to assign a different friendly name and icon or picture to an item in your UI. For example, the entity ID for this bedroom fan is bedroom_fan. Or, more specifically, the full entity ID is switch.bedroom_fan. If we go back to the configuration, we can see where that's coming from. It's switch, and then it says bedroom_fan. That's descriptive, but it doesn't look great in the UI. So, if we use these customize options, we can assign it a friendly name. Basically, a friendly name can be formatted any way you like. So, we'll go ahead and add one for our switches. I'll go ahead and copy all of this code, and then paste it into my configuration file right here at the top under time zone. It's important to note that the customized code goes under the Home Assistant heading. So I'll go ahead and delete most of this because I don't really need it. One thing that I found that's really helpful is to open up your Home Assistant instance next to your code. You can see all the entity IDs in Home Assistant by going to the Developer tool and then clicking the States icon, which are these two arrows. So I want to go ahead and assign friendly names to my switches. So I will say that's a pretty good start there. Now you might be wondering, what is this MDI kettle thing all about? Well, Home Assistant allows you to assign an icon to any of the devices in the UI. It's this thing you see here that's currently a lightning bolt. You can change that icon to any material design icon or an image saved to your Raspberry Pi. I'll show you how to do both. You can see the available MDI icons by going to materialdesignicons.com. Then this list here shows you everything that you can use in Home Assistant. You can also search in this bar for anything you like. So I'm going to say fan, and then, oh, there's one. And so all you're going to do here is instead of saying MDI kettle, you'll say MDI fan. And then I'm going to do the same with a light. And last, for the Wemo, I want to assign a picture that I can store on the Raspberry Pi instead of an MDI icon. To do that, I'll go back to the Home Assistant website. I'll go ahead and copy the sample code over for now, but I'll change that in a second. Next, I need to go find the picture I want to use. So, now, the next thing I'll do is I'll go back to WinSCP, and in the .home assistant folder, I'll make a new folder called www, and then inside of that folder, I will add the picture that I just downloaded. Now, over in my Home Assistant configuration file, I'll just say /local, and then the name of the file, which was wemo_logo.png, I think. Yep. Awesome. Then I'll hit File Save, and then go back to my Home Assistant UI and restart it and see how it looks. Okay, that's a great place to start. So the next thing I want to look at are these badges up here. In particular, I want to look at these two, which is this long string of numbers and this other long string of numbers. This is from Nmap Tracker, and it's currently set to scan for my wife and my phone. But this is kind of ugly, and it's ugly for two reasons. One, I can't figure out what this is. And two, when I look under my entity IDs, it's this nasty string of letters that means nothing to me. So, I'm actually going to do two things. First, I'm going to change the entity ID. That'll make it easier when I'm creating automations or scripts. And then I'm going to give them a friendly name. This next bit really only applies to device trackers because it assigns those entity IDs a little bit differently than other devices. So in the .home assistant folder, there's a file called knowndevices.yaml. If I open that, I can see those two strings of numbers. And with it, I see the MAC address from my and my wife's phone. What I'll do first is take this first string of numbers and change it to something a little bit more friendly. So this first MAC address is for my phone, and then the second one is for my wife's phone. It's also worth noting here that you can assign a friendly name and a picture right here from Known Devices. You could also do this using the customize options that I showed you earlier. There's some redundancy here, so you can do it anywhere you'd like. I typically just add that information here. So I'll say Ben and Kaylin, and I will assign pictures that I put into my folder. All right, then I'll go ahead and hit save. Before I restart Home Assistant, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this introduction text. I've seen it a lot. I'll go ahead and hit save that, and then I'll restart Home Assistant again. And sweet, we're back up. Well, kind of. The Wemo takes a second to come back on. But as you can see, now the friendly name is Ben and Kaylin. And then if I check the entity IDs, it's Ben_6P and Kaylin_6P. All right, now to get to the good stuff, I'll go back to the Home Assistant website and then go to Components and then Organization and then Group. The ability to create groups inside of Home Assistant is awesome. It can be a little confusing at first because getting used to some of the names, like default view or group or card, can be a little weird. Right now, we don't have a lot going on. We have a couple of groups that was created by Home Assistant by default, but this really isn't useful for how we want to use it. So, we'll go back to our configuration.yaml file, and we'll create some groups. For now, just think about groups as being a card like this. So I want to create a group called Bedroom and a group called Living Room. I'll go back to my States tool so I can see all the entity IDs, and I'll put them in their corresponding groups. All right, that looks pretty good there. I'll go ahead and hit File Save, and then restart Home Assistant and see what it looks like. All right. So we're mostly back up here, still waiting for the Wemo, but as you can see, it looks a little bit better. Now I've grouped my switches into things that kind of make sense. So I have my bedroom stuff all here and my living room stuff here. But it's still not perfect. What I'd like to have are some tabs across the top. This is where things get just a little bit funny. Going back to my configuration file, I'll create a little note here for myself, and I'll say views, and then down below, I'll say groups. I think of groups as being the cards and views as being the tab. I'll copy all my groups under groups, and then I'll delete all of these as views. Thinking about what I want here, I want to have tabs across the top. One that says bedroom, one that says living room, and then maybe one that even says like family or something. So I need to create some views. To do that, I'll create some code that looks basically like this. But instead of saying switch, I'm going to tell it what cards or groups I want in that view. So I'm going to say group.bedroom. Now, I can't have two groups called bedroom. Like, I have one here that is a card, basically, and then one here that's a tab. So I'll call my view bedroom underscore view, and then we should be okay. To signify that it's a view, I'll add the code view yes. What this is telling Home Assistant is that you want this to display as a tab. For the view, I'll assign groups or other entity IDs that I want to be underneath of that. So let me create another one for the living room. And then I will link it to group.livingroom, which is referring to this set of entity IDs. But then underneath of it, I'm going to add a couple more things. For example, I'll add my Chromecast, which is called Media Player BCRCC. And let's see, is there anything else I want to put in there? I don't think so. And let me create one last view. I'm going to call this Family. And under that, I'm going to assign a couple other entity IDs. I'm going to add the device tracker entity IDs. That will put these two buttons that are on the top of the default view into that tab. I'll also add this input select over there. And let's see, is there anything else? I think that's pretty good. All right, I'll go ahead and save this configuration and then restart Home Assistant. Doesn't look like it's coming back here. Let's take a look at our code and see if we can find any problems. First, we can check the Home Assistant log and see what's going on. This says that there's a problem in line 117. Okay, looking, and yeah, here's line 117, and then here in line 116, I have 3 spaces instead of 4. Whoops. Go ahead and fix that. Looks like I did the same thing on line 121. And 127. Yeah, look at that. One thing that's always a good idea is to use a YAML checker before you try and run a bunch of code. A great one is called YAMLint.com. You can paste your configuration file and then hit go, and it'll check to see if there's any syntax errors in it. It's super handy. Now that we fixed those problems, we have to restart Home Assistant. The front end is dead, so I'll have to do it the more manual way and open PuTTY, and then log in, and then I'll just say sudo reboot. Yeah, so Home Assistant's back up, and our tabs are there. That's great. So inside of this view, called bedroom underscore view, you can see the following group, group.bedroom, which I defined down here, which has these 3 entity IDs in it. If I look at the view living room, which is here, you can see that it contains the group called group.livingroom, which we defined here, and my Chromecast, which has the entity ID media underscore player.bcrcc. And then, last but not least, we'll look at the family view, and it has the 2 buttons for the device tracker and the input select for my status. All right, that's pretty good. I'm happy with a lot of this. This is a lot better having these tabs. It really helps me find the things that I'm looking for quickly. But let's get fancy here. There's a couple things I don't like. For example, this script is not something that I would probably use often. And really, the only time I'd use the script is if I was calling it in an automation. So you can actually hide things from the UI by going back to the customize text, adding the entity ID, and I'll say script.test_script, and then underneath of that, I will say hidden, and then yes. Oops, forgot my colon here. All right, that'll hide that from the front end. The next thing I want to do is to move these 2 badges down into a card. To do that, I'll create a new group, and I will call that group. Nope, I'm going to call that environment. And then I will assign those two entity IDs. And those are... And... All right. And now, for one last time, I will restart Home Assistant. And there we go. Now those two badges are moved down inside of a card. Sensors by default will show up as a badge unless you define them inside of a group. The same is true for device trackers. Other things, like switches and lights, will probably always be inside of a card, and it's not possible to make them a badge. It's just one of the things about Home Assistant that you kind of get a feel for after a while. For the grand finale here, I'm going to do the thing that I would not recommend until you're very comfortable with groups, and that's changing the default view. To do that, all you have to do is create a new view called default_view. Then, inside of that, you can put anything in it that you'd like. So I'm going to add the group for the bedroom, the group for the living room, and then I'll also add the two device trackers. And now, I'll go ahead and hit save and restart Home Assistant again. All right, Home Assistant is back up. And there we go. Now the default view when you first log into Home Assistant will contain all of the things that you define under default_view. You'll notice that that group for our environmental sensors is gone. In fact, you can't see it anywhere in the UI, which is why I wouldn't recommend using a default view until you're really comfortable for accounting for all of your entity IDs. It's easy to lose stuff forever. And like I said, you won't even know they're gone until you look under the developer tool and notice that there's entity IDs that you should be able to see that you can't see at all. So yeah, that's basically how you get started with groups inside of Home Assistant.
So I hope this video can help some of you guys get started organizing Home Assistant. It can definitely get crazy, but having a pretty user interface is awesome. And most importantly, that makes it easier to show off. So there's that. Anyway, as always, if you have any questions or comments, hit me up here or on my new website. By the way, sorry this summer's been kind of slow for getting more videos out, but I have exciting news. I'm actually going to be moving into a house at the end of August, which I'm so excited about. Primarily, I'll finally be able to do a bunch of different videos that I've been looking to do for a while, like changing switches, or door locks, or building Megadesk, or 3D printers, and all these things that I have just had piling up that now I will finally be able to do. I should be getting a lot more videos out towards September and then into the fall, so don't go anywhere. If you like this video and you want to see more, subscribe and share these videos, because honestly, the more this channel grows, the more it inspires me to do cool stuff. Or I guess I should say, the more it inspires me to pick up my camera and show you the cool stuff I'm doing. And probably to make it pretty, because honestly, if people weren't watching, it would be kind of crazy. It's kind of like taking notes for somebody, and then like you know you're going to give them your notes, so you do better, but if you didn't know you're going to give them your notes look like crap. That's like home automation for me, basically. Yeah. Anyway, as always, happy automating. Cheers.